Hello and welcome, it's me Nathan with Grandstream Support, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about the Advanced VLAN Configuration Guide. Now oftentimes there's a big misconception between configuring our router and our APs with VLANs. Oftentimes I have a lot of people who sometimes skip out on the fundamental concepts on how VLANs work, and sometimes they forget to program their intermediary devices like switches. So I'm going to go ahead and explain how VLANs work in our GWN topology, as well as configure a third-party switch, just so you could understand how the VLAN is going to work throughout the network to make sure that both your users and your VoIP equipment work seamlessly without issue. So with that being said, as you can see before you, we have a little topology here. I have a GWN 7000, which is going to have 3 network subnets on it. We have the default network, which I, by the way, have changed because the default on the actual factory 7000 should be a 2.x network. But as you can see, the default in green is a 99 network. The other network I have is VLAN 20, which is going to have the third octet end in 20 as well, and the guest network, which is going to be on VLAN 30. Now the reason why we have VLANs is so we can separate our different networks into their own broadcast domains, and this actually cuts out a lot of the congestion through networks that's associated with broadcasting. But it also helps us keep our network secure so that networks like the guest network that's going to be providing internet for end users won't compromise our gateways or APs. We can actually lock down access ports on that guest network. Same thing for the VoIP network. We'll strictly be using VoIP equipment on there, and we can even add our own counterweights onto those network devices so they actually have some priority routing. Then we're going to have the default network, which I'm going to be programming all of our equipment on. And while I'll do that, I'll also pop into this Netgear PoE switch and show you how to configure VLAN tagging on it. We'll also be working with a 7600 8P, which we're actually going to be programming from the 7000, so we'll actually never have to log into that one, but I'll show you how we can set that AP with all 3 subnets. With that being said, I'm also going to be showing you how to switch the UCM over to use VLAN 20 as well as our GXP over there. And after we're done with that, we're going to go ahead and make sure everything's registered. After we confirm that, then that will be it for the video. But with that being said, let's go ahead and get started.
Alright, one of the first things that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create our LAN subnets on our router first, then we're going to work our way down to the endpoint. So we're going to start with the router, then go into the Netgear ProSafe PoE switch, then move on to the UCM and configuring the phone as well with VLAN tagging. I will also add the AP after we've done this. That way you can see what it looks like when we've programmed the AP, but the AP should take no longer than 30 seconds. So let's go ahead and dive in. I'm going to log in using my ultra custom password. One of the first things that you obviously want to do before moving on is just looking at the status page of the router. As we can see, I have this 7000 pre-configured as it is. We have both WAN 1 and WAN 2 enabled, as well as a virtual interface or also a VLAN tag here, which this is what I use for my public network. So you can ignore that. This is not going to be part of the tutorial, but as you can see, we can support not just physical ports, but also virtual ports as well. But the one that's important here is knowing what our WAN port is and making sure that we can verify that it's functioning and working. And as you can see, the throughput and aggregate does show us that these ports are in fact working. So moving on, first thing we're going to do is going to go ahead and create the LAN group. Now I did edit the default group. If you were to get this router straight out of the box, you'll see a 2.x network, not a 99.1. So I did make that change, so don't let that confuse you. But let's go ahead and we're going to start with the VoIP network. I'm going to click add, hit VoIP. Make sure it's enabled. Routing policy will actually help you control where the default route's going to be routing out of. So by default, it's going to WAN 1 auto only. There is a way to manipulate this to actually support load balancing, which I'll go into in a little further demonstration. But for now, we're going to go ahead and keep it basic. We also have our destinations here. This is allowing this LAN group to route to a certain network interface. or network. And as you can see, by default, WAN 1 is enabled. Now, if I wanted the VoIP network to also access the default network, I can do that. But for this demonstration, I'm going to make sure that the VoIP network is completely isolated. I, however, would probably set the default network to access the VLAN network, and I'll show you that in a little bit, especially when I go on to logging in on our VoIP equipment when it's on the other subnet, which is the VLAN. First thing I'm going to do, let's go ahead and hit the VLAN tag or the VLAN ID. I'm going to go ahead and make it 20. That way it kind of represents the subnet I'm also going to be giving it. Let's switch this over to 20. This is going to be the router's IP addresses. Now, if you have any static allocations that you want to assign to, let's say, the UCM, you can actually add that here if you want. Next, we need to set up our DHCP pool. We do that by enabling the DHCP option. Now, as you can see, we have a start and end range. You can manipulate this if you want, as well as the lease time for each IP. And if you have any additional options, you can put the options number in here along with what option you want to allocate to that number. Next, we have DHCP gateway. So I'm going to make this the router's IP address .1. Preferred DNS for this network group. We can have a preferred DNS for different network groups, so that does give us a nice little handy advantage here. Let's go ahead and fill this in. I'm just going to use Google. But with that done out of the way, let's go ahead and hit save. And there we go. We've created our first VLAN network group. Now, because practice makes perfect, let's go ahead and create the guest network now. So I'm going to go ahead and give this a name, guest net. We're going to make sure that this is also enabled. We're only going to give it access to WAN 1. And VLAN tagging is already enabled. Let's go ahead and give it the proper VLAN tag that we want. Enable IVP4. Once again, the router's static address. Enable DHCP. Add the DHCP gateway. Oops. Preferred DNS. Save that. Apply changes. And creating VLANs on our router, it is easy as that. But now for the next part, and this is the part that most people forget, is to actually create VLAN tagging on their switch. So for ease of demonstration, I'm going to go ahead and use a Netgear switch. Let's go ahead and log in. Now that we're logged in, let's go ahead and actually create the VLAN database on the switch and allow which ports these VLANs are allowed to access. So for that, I'm going to go ahead and click on VLAN. I'm going to use the 802.1q protocol for this. Go to the advanced settings, configure the VLAN database. So let's go ahead and add a VLAN here. We're going to add 20 and 30. Now that's creating the VLAN database, but now we need to make sure that these VLANs are allowed to go to specific ports of the switch. So let's go ahead, click on VLAN membership. Now, as you can see, I'm going to switch over from VLAN 1 to VLAN 20, and then we can go ahead and do a group operation, tag all. Now, you could individually toggle these if you want to untag traffic or leave it as like a native. But for right now, we're going to make it easier on ourselves and just do everything all at once. We'll also do this for VLAN 30. Now to check our work, we'll go back to VLAN tag. Oops, it looks like I also need to apply changes on 20. Good thing you saw me do that. Now you just learned something. Go ahead and tag all and apply changes. So make sure you apply changes every time you add something like that. Let's check our configuration. There we go. We have both the default network, which is the 1, 20, and 30, all add to each one of those ports on our switch. Now, obviously, if let's say we had port 8 going to our router, you can restrict what VLANs are allowed to operate going to that router, and that will give you some control on not passing that traffic to that specific router. But with the switch all taken care of, let's go ahead and program the UCM, and we're going to make sure that this is on the VoIP VLAN. In order to do this, we're going to go to System Settings, Network Settings, And as you can see here, I'm currently operating in switch mode. And because I'm operating in switch, honestly, it doesn't matter if you're in route or in dual mode, you will have the VLAN 2 QoS 802.1q VLAN tags available for you. So because our VoIP network is going to be on 20, I'm simply going to allocate it as 20. I'm also going to make this a static network as well, and I'm going to want roughly the same IP address of 99.210, but instead I'm going to be making it 20.210. Let's make sure we have the subnet corrected. IP gateway obviously is going to be our router. DNS server 8.8 and 8.8.4.4. Now I know many of you are questioning why I don't just make this UCM pick up a DHCP lease. That is because it is good practice to make sure you set it as a static, because the last thing you want is your server to be changing its IPs. So by setting it to a static IP, we can ensure that we're not going to lose connectivity to it. So let's go ahead and hit save. And once I do this, it will reboot the UCM, and I will have to hit its new IP from the default network, because currently my computer is on the 99.x network, and there you can probably hear it spooling up its fans. There we go. And let's move on to the phone as well. One thing that you'll notice is my phone is not registered. That's because I did some pre-configuration here, made it 20.10, so I didn't have to go back and change that on the general settings account. So just be aware that if you already had your phones configured with your UCM and then you're making the VLAN change, you're going to have to go back here and change the IP to the new SIP server location, but I've done that preemptively. The cool thing and the advantage of having zero config provision our phone endpoints is once you switch over the VLAN tag to the new IP address, as long as the UCM can detect that that phone is on the same network subnet that the phone is on, it should auto provision to its new SIP server IP. So that's one advantage to zero config. You won't have to manually type in the SIP server, but we're getting into the weeds here. So let's go ahead and click on network, advanced settings, and then we're going to scroll down to layer 2 QoS 802.1q. Isn't that very nice that we kind of label everything the same on our products, especially for the network settings? One other option that you might want to work with as well is if you are daisy chaining a PC onto this phone that may be on a different network entirely, we also have the ability of doing the PC port VLAN tag as well. So let's say we had made a VLAN 40 and VLAN 40 was only for the customer's PCs. We could then input that there, but currently I actually don't have it daisy chain like how we did in the diagram, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to keep it at the default of 0. But if you did daisy chain, that's how you change the VLAN for that computer. I'm going to go ahead and hit save and apply. Now as you can see here, it's currently just spinning its wheels. It's actually not going anywhere, and there we go. My connection has timed out. Now there could be a chance that that phone might not immediately go offline after making that change. If that's the case, just go ahead and send the reboot to the phone. After it boots back up, it will be on the new VLAN network. And just to verify this, we can actually go to the 7000 and scroll down to clients and actually see if we have a lease for any of these IPs. Now my phone is not booted up yet, but if it did boot up and got an IP address, you would see it pop up here. You would see both its MAC address and the new IP that it just retained. And if you were watching closely, we actually did see that just changed to 20.104. Moving on, let's go ahead and see if we can't log back into that UCM. Now obviously this is the old IP address. Let's go ahead and try to hit that IP address at the new IP that we set statically, and you're going to notice something. I'm not going to be able to hit it, and you're going to know why in a second. So even though I'm trying to hit the new IP address, now Chrome will sometimes do this where it'll try to autocomplete. It is trying to currently hit 20 right now. We go ahead and do that again, hit enter. Look at this, look at this. I got a connection refused. That should tell you something. That should tell you that our gateway is more than likely blocking our attempt to hit that network. So in order to fix this, we're gonna go ahead to the LAN subnets again, router, hit LAN, and because my PC is on the default network, I need to make sure I give it permission to access the VLAN 20 network. And we can do that just by editing the LAN subnet, clicking on the VoIP subnet. Now that gives me permissions to access it. Let's go ahead and hit save. We're going to apply changes. Now watch what happens when we hit enter. Look at that. Now we have access to the VLAN subnet. So that's a really quick and easy way you can get control of another subnet by allowing one subnet to access its destination subnet. Let's go ahead and log in. Let's make sure that our extension is registered. Now I only have one extension, that is 1001, and that's what we had set for our phone. It changed IP addresses. Oops, don't let me forget the third octet. There we go. And just to be extra sure, let's go ahead and make sure that this is also registered. And look, bang. Fairly easy. So now that we have our switch configured and our VLANs configured, let's go ahead now and configure our SSIDs for each network group. Now, admittedly, you don't have to technically create an SSID for each network group, but it definitely makes management a lot easier if you do. Then after that, we're going to go ahead and link up the AP. Now, like I said before, it probably takes just about 30 seconds to do this, and I'm definitely going to test myself on this. So let's go ahead. We're going to go to SSIDs. Now we currently already have the default network disabled on this. Now you could already use this network just by enabling it, and we can go ahead and call it default. Let's go ahead and give it a password. Click save. Now let's go ahead and create our VoIP network. I'm going to go ahead and enable that, call this VoIP. Make sure we add our VLAN tag onto here as well. If forgotten, this is a very common mistake, and you won't be getting the right subnet. Go ahead and add a password. And one last thing, we're going to enable VoIP Enterprise. Now this actually helps with downtime when you're jumping from cell to cell between one AP to another. We're using a single AP, so it might not be that important, but it's still something that would come in handy if we ever decide to deploy any more APs in the future. So let's go ahead and save that and move on to our guest network. Don't forget the VLAN. We're going to move down, make sure that we create a password for this one as well. Or if you want, you can go ahead and leave it open if it's going to be a true guest network, but more than likely you're still going to want to lock it up just so you don't get any freeloaders. One thing that we could do differently on this SSID is enable client isolation. This actually helps us choose whether or not people joining this SSID network are allowed to either hit the internet only, not allowed to communicate with each other. So like if we had two devices connected on Wi-Fi, do you really want them to connect to another device that's also on that same Wi-Fi SSID or not? I mean, for security concerns, you might want to forbid that access. We even have the ability of denying gateway access to, let's say, our APs or the default gateway, which is our router. But beyond that, I'm going to go ahead and send that onto internet mode. And more than likely, you're not going to want to give them the VoIP Enterprise option on here, not unless they're going to be using this for VoIP communication, which I highly doubt it being a guest network. So let's go ahead and save that and apply changes. All right, now that we have that done, let's go ahead and actually add the access point. So we're going to go ahead and hit Discover AP. There we go, we can see our AP here. Let's go ahead and pair this selected device. And as you can see, this device is now paired. Now, to make sure that this AP will be broadcasting all the SSIDs that we want, we can click on the SSID section. We can edit our default, see the device membership. This AP is already a member device, meaning that it's going to be broadcasting this SSID. Now we can also do this check for VLAN 30 and VLAN 20, and I'm pretty sure by default it's going to attach itself to all three. Now if you wanted to remove it, you can go ahead and select it and move it to the left. But just like in the diagram that I had showed you originally, we're going to keep it as accurate to that diagram as possible. Now if I go ahead and click on my network options on my computer, I should see those SSIDs being broadcasted. And as you can see, I have default, guest, and the VoIP network all being broadcasted. So that worked. Now your next line of test, just to make sure everything is working, is to actually log on to these SSIDs and make sure that you can retrieve an IP address. If for some reason you can connect to it but you're not getting an IP address, you had screwed something up on the VLAN tagging at some point. Now on the router that's really hard to do, but on a switch that can actually be very easy to do. Now because I've done this so many times, I know that this is a working setup, so you're definitely going to have to trust me on that. The next thing I do want to show you is if you want to use load balancing on the GWN, I'll show you exactly how we can go about doing it. So if we do a little recap on the LAN side, we edit one of our LAN options. As you can see, the routing policy is set to WAN 1 only. Now if I want it to do load balancing, I'll make sure that it has access to both WAN 1 and WAN 2, but we also need to change our routing policy to allow it to not just go out WAN 1, but also WAN 2. So let's go ahead and hit save on that one. We're going to go to routing, click on routing policy, click on policy routing, click on policy, and now we're actually going to create, actually it looks like I already created one in here, just forgot to delete it out, is we're going to actually create a policy in which will reflect us to be able to route out both interfaces. Now by default this is probably what you would see if you had created or enabled these WAN interfaces, but I'm going to go ahead and create the custom one that I just deleted. We'll call this failover. One of the members is going to be WAN 1 auto, the next is going to be WAN 2 auto, and this is actually going to help us route for failover. We're going to click save on that. And after that, we can move back to our LAN policy, go to the default network, and then select our failover that we had just created. Now this actually will help us do load balancing between both WAN 1 and WAN 2. Let's go ahead and hit save and apply changes. And that's it. We have finally created that topology that we have described in the intro in the video, plus we learned a little bit about failover as well. And I know some of you are already going to comment, hey, you setting up that AP didn't take less than 30 seconds. It took a lot longer. Well, yeah, it's because I talk a lot. But now if you'd imagine if I didn't talk and I just set everything up, it would actually be well within that 30-second mark. With that being said, my name's Nathan with Grandstream Support, and as always, you have a good one.
We hope that you found that video tutorial helpful, and if you did, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe to our channel for the latest in video tutorials. I'm Nathan Sharp. You have a good one.